Again. Also, what's happening in this picture? I just realized. What is that? What is this drawing? Hi, I'm Amateur Andrew. In today's video, we're going to be reacting to Mr. Mythos, the Curse of Led Zeppelin music's dark side. I've been seeing some of y'all keep suggesting Mr. Mythos, and so I thought kind of take a little bit of a break from Wendigoon and just kind of see what else is out there. And a topic that will always fascinate me is the dark side of the music industry. And I know some other people have been suggesting that I read like lyrics and kind of commentate on those. And with music, it's a very interesting topic in Christianity. There's one end of the spectrum that thinks like rock and roll and that kind of stuff is just evil, period. Like even like the thought of like Christian rock and roll or Christian metal is just in itself evil. Like like rock and roll and metal just can't like be good at any, no matter what the lyrics are, no matter what the intent is, like it just can't be good. And then there's that other spectrum which just thinks, okay, well, intent matters. And so you have your worldly metal, you have your Christian metal, you have your worldly rock and roll, you have your Christian rock and roll. Like, so there's two sides to that, I think, that are most prominent. I tend to be on that other side of like, well, you know, I don't believe a genre of music is just outright evil. I think intent matters a lot. And, you know, I don't think instruments can be evil. I think there is something powerful about music too, and you see it in the Bible with Elisha. I think like three kings come up to him. I can't remember their names right off the top of my head, but he's one of the kings is really wicked, and Elisha really doesn't want anything to do with him. But one of the other kings is really righteous, and so Elisha says, "Well, I'll help this one king." And I think actually I can find it. Wait, hang on. Let me see. I think I know where it is. Second Kings. This video is off to a hot start. I've already gone to the Bible. We're 2 seconds into this, and I've already gone. I have already gone. That's not it. It'll be... No. This is it. Nope. Went too far. It's in... Okay, so it's here. Jehoshaphat. That's who it is. Jehoshaphat. And then Ahab's son, Joram. And Elisha wants nothing to do with Joram. Let me see. Elisha, surely is the Lord God. Okay, yeah. Verse 14. Okay, I found it. Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord Almighty is whom I serve, I wouldn't even bother with you except for my respect for King Jehoshaphat of Judah. Now bring me someone who can play the harp." So Elisha's like really mad at Joram for coming to him, but he respects Jehoshaphat, and so in order like to calm down, he has someone play the harp, and then as the harp's being played, the power of the Lord comes upon Elijah, which is I've always found to be a very interesting verse. Now, I think it also speaks to the power of music, that it can kind of like rile us up, or it can make us feel at peace and that kind of thing. Like I think there is kind of something spiritual about music to a certain extent. So I'm curious to see what Mr. Mythos has here. I have never watched a Mr. Mythos video, so here we go.
Jimmy Page, the erudite and softly spoken lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin, once told a journalist, "I do not worship the devil, but magic does intrigue me, magic of all kinds. It wasn't for some years until I understood what it was all about." Page, a native to Hounds.
Magic's another interesting topic in Christianity. It's... I'm gonna get my audio right in my headset. It's... You see in the Bible, sorcery has always been there. From, you know, you have Christians who pray to God and they perform miracles, and then you also have the other side. You especially see that in Exodus with Moses, and he goes, and I think it's like the first 3 plagues. Like Moses does what God says, and he brings these 3 plagues, but then the Egyptian sorcerers are able to recreate all of them. And then I think it's like the 4th plague where they can finally stop saying, like, recreating them. So the devil can do some things. So, and you always kind of hear like, oh, they sold their soul to the devil. They sold their soul to the devil. I think, I don't know if that's like, I guess some people say that's a conspiracy thing. I think that's true for some people. Like, I think there is, you know, a temptation to do that for instant gratification, I think the devil offers that a lot. It's just like instant gratification, instant fame. And so, I don't know. We're only 20 seconds in. I'm already jumping ahead.
West London shook the world of rock and roll unlike any other star before him. Broodingly handsome, witty, and with a quirky and exotic taste, Page was a peacock among pheasants. His circle was the most eccentric of the age of Aquarius. Finger-snapping, hash-smoking, LSD-dropping dandies. Page's circle, however, had a darker side, a side entrenched in mystical Eastern esotericism and ancient magic, the occult. Jimmy Page's peacock.
And you hear about that a lot. Again, just pausing here for 2 seconds. I don't know. Again, that's why it fascinates me about music, because you always hear these rumors about, is this musician doing this, or is this musician doing that? And it's kind of like, you scratch it off. I think some of it's just like message board talk, but I think there is like some truth to it too. Like some people do dab in it a little bit.
Talking connected him with many of the legends of rock and roll, from Eric Clapton to the Rolling Stones, both of whom he regularly jammed with as a session guitarist. Page eventually founded Led Zeppelin, the experimental evolution of his former band, the New Yardbirds. Zeppelin, in his own words, came together like magic. First, he found John Paul Jones, the bass guitarist, then Robert Plant, the lead singer, and finally John Bonham, the drummer. An unholy quaternity reflected by their personal symbols, 4 sigils. Admittedly, this was an unusual choice of logo for a band. At the time, sigils were little known outside of esoteric circles.
I don't know a lot about Led Zeppelin. I know my fiance likes some of their songs. I like some of their songs. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest rock and roll fan. There was a period of time where I think I listened to like 80s like hair bands or whatever, like like Def Leppard and all that stuff. I've heard a few songs by Led Zeppelin. Stuff like this, like growing up, went by me. I never noticed this stuff, but you kind of do see it in like the music industry, and you see it right here, obviously with Led Zeppelin. So I don't know. Here we go.
A sigil is a symbol used in magic, often the pictorial signature of a demon or other spirit, today most frequently employed in chaos magic. They can be used for blessings, just as they could be used for curses. It's speculated that Page's foray into the occult may have had devastating consequences for him and for his bandmates. Over a curious sort of time, bad luck, accidents, sickness, and eventually several deaths would plague the band members and those close to them. This is known as the Curse of Led Zeppelin. For this investigation, we'll take a closer look at the historical facts surrounding these events, and with all due respect for the victims involved, explore the detailed speculations of longtime Zeppelin fans as well as occult researchers. Some say that Jimmy Page sold his soul, the soul of Robert Plant, and the soul of John Bonham to the devil. To understand the Curse of Led Zeppelin in its full mystery, we must go back, long before the era of rock and roll, rewinding nearly 6 centuries to the infamous alchemist Johann Georg Faust. Welcome to Occult Mysteries.
Well, I'm hooked. This is like right up my alley. I love this kind of content. I was also thinking, like with magic, I've heard stories of missionaries when they go into like third world countries, like Africa or like these islands. I can't remember the exact story. I remember there was one story in particular where missionaries were going and they just got instantly sick and they couldn't figure out what was going wrong, and eventually they got out of a certain town. I don't remember. I think they were like warned if they went to a certain place they would be cursed, and so somehow, some way, and so they went to this place, and then I guess like the sorcerers in that town were like placing a curse on them, so they got really sick, and then there was they got better, obviously, because they were able to tell a story. But I don't know. It's just, you have both sides, and I think that's the interesting part, and can also be a scary part. Because I think, magic and the dark arts and that stuff, like wizards and witches and all that. It's not a topic you talk about in church, uh, a lot. Probably. I mean, I can see why we don't, but it's interesting that spiritual warfare that the Bible always talks about how there's good and there's evil, and you see that in the Bible, excuse me, like I said, and especially in Exodus where Moses is, doing God's will and bringing these plagues on, and but the Egyptians, that's the part that's always really fascinating, is that the sorcerers there were able to recreate it up to a certain extent, but like when Moses throws his staff on the ground, it turns into a snake. They do it the same thing, but then Moses' snake eats them all. So it's like they can recreate up to a certain point. The devil can mimic God to a certain point, but he can never win. He can kind of like deceive people and like make people want to sell their soul to him because he's like, oh, I can do these great things for you. But in the end, it just kind of falls apart because he's not a real God. He's the fallen angel, and God always wins in the end. So I don't know. I'm curious to see where this goes.
A pact with the devil, also known as a Faustian bargain, is a literary trope as old as time itself. Christian tradition tells that a contract with the devil is a transaction between Satan and a person. Satan delivers worldly goods, which the person exchanges for their soul. History abounds with tales of famed public figures said to have made pacts with the devil. The most famous of these tales is of Johann Georg Faust. The story of Faust begins with a dissatisfied scholar who has exhausted all means of human study. In exchange for infinite knowledge and a boundless hedonistic lifestyle, he trades his soul. The story opens with Faust alone in his study, preparing a ritual to conjure a spirit. "Therefore myself to magic I give," he says. When the devil, Mephistopheles, is summoned and agrees to serve Faust, the scholar implores, "How must I thy services repay?" To which Mephistopheles responds, "Undersignest merely with a drop of blood," which means, in no uncertain terms, with his soul. Faust accepts. Alas, the deal ends in tragedy. The story is said to have been based upon the real-life German alchemist Johann Georg Faust, who supposedly died in a laboratory explosion after the devil came to collect his soul personally. The devil, or Lucifer, which in Latin means the morning star, was created as the anointed cherub, the most powerful of God's angels. According to the book of Ezekiel, Lucifer...
I'm going to interrupt for a brief second. It's interesting too, because when Jesus is being tempted, and I believe, and I guess it's like a random rant, but I've been thinking about this a lot lately, how we're all born sinners, and we all are born with different temptations, I think. Like, someone's, sorry, I still have a cough. Someone's, more tempted by lust than another person, and someone's more tempted by theft than another person is. And so we all kind of have, like, we're all born sinners, but there are different things that tempt us. And so, like, if you want to be a rock star, you want to be a famous musician, you want to be a pop star, you want to be a famous actor, you want to do these things. And so if that's the only thing you care about, here comes the devil. And you're like, oh, just sell your soul to me and I'll give it to you. And I think it's interesting that when Jesus is on the world, he comes and his ministry just begins. He's baptized. God says, "This is my beloved Son whom I am well pleased." The Holy Spirit appears as a dove. Like, it's this huge moment. And then God immediately leads Jesus into the desert, right? For 40 days and 40 nights. And he's just fasting. He doesn't eat. And then there's the devil tempting Jesus. And how does the devil tempt Jesus? He tries to offer him power. And that's interesting to me. Because, again, I always kind of believe, like, oh, we're all tempted by something. And so he's trying to do his best to stop Jesus from following God. And so he's trying to, like, sway him, saying, oh, I can give you power. I can give you all these kingdoms. I can give you all these nations. And Jesus says no, obviously. But, yeah. I thought that's interesting, how he tempts Jesus. But Jesus doesn't buy into it. He continues to quote scripture the whole time. The devil's talking to him, which I think as Christians is really important, which, again, you got to really know what you believe, because the devil is a master liar. and he will do anything and anything and everything to get you off the track, the right track. So you have to really stand guard what you believe in.
Had musical instruments built into his very being, stating that, quote, "The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created." And thus, Satan is thought to have been heaven's finest musician. It is because of this that there is an intrinsic, almost natural relationship between the Faustian bargain and music. And many of you...
It's interesting with the devil because he leads worship in heaven, and then it's like he's tired of God getting the glory, so he wants to get the glory. It's also interesting with Judas, as I've been bringing up in the videos with Mary Magdalene, how that's like what set him off, because she was worshiping Jesus and she was pouring out all this perfume, and so it's almost kind of like, again, like the devil. Judas got tired of seeing Jesus get praised, and so he tried to kill him, or he does betray him, and he does die, but Jesus resurrects again. Also, what's happening in this picture? I just realized. What is that? What is this drawing? Okay, I didn't realize that was... Okay, but anyway. Yeah, it's like Judas got tired of Jesus getting praised. That's what set him off. And that's why he wanted to betray him. Same reason why Satan left God. He was tired of praising him, and he wanted the praise for himself. So, interesting contrast there. Or parallels, I should say. I don't know what the right word is. Anyway, I'm a pastor.
You may already be aware that deals with the devil are a common trope in nearly every musical genre. In the year 1713, famed Italian composer Giuseppe Tartini dreamt that the devil visited him and promised to serve him in exchange for his soul. In the dream, Tartini accepted, and out of curiosity...
This is some interesting art here. Like, man, if that appeared in my dreams, there's no way. I would wake up. I would be like, get me out of this. I don't know why you're playing the violin, but get out of here.
Presented the devil with his violin. The Great Spirit began to play the most beautiful solo Tartini had ever heard. It left him breathless. When he awoke, Tartini frantically attempted to recreate the composition to the best of his recollection. This piece became the Devil's Trill Sonata, a composition noted for its incredibly difficult and technically complex double-stop trills, even though Tartini had only just taken up the violin 3 years prior. He went on to become one of the most influential violinists that ever lived. It is often speculated that Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin's most famous song and often regarded as the most popular rock song of all time, was a product of the devil. Besides the well-known theory that the song played backwards is an audible ode to Satan, Robert Plant once said that the song came to him in a dream.
I don't know. Like, that's another big thing, like backmasking with songs. Like, I don't know. I haven't studied the science on it, but I just don't understand what the purpose of it is. I guess it's a real thing, but I just don't know. Like, I don't know. Some people like really freak out, like, oh, if you play it backwards, it's like they're praising the devil. And I've always been like, but okay. Like, if you play a lot of things backwards, like, you could unintentionally hear something that's not necessarily meant to be there. Like, sometimes when I'm editing my own videos, like, I'm playing the audio back, and you could maybe decipher some words there, and it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's just, I never have really bought into the whole, like, backmasking conspiracy. I don't know what the science is. Like, if you hide a hidden message in there and say, you know, I love Jesus or I like dogs, is that really going to influence people if they don't actually hear it? I guess maybe the brain can process it, even though your conscious can't. I don't know. Like, I don't really understand the whole backmasking thing. Like, I've heard it, like, it's like a controversial, like, oh, if you play the song back, it says they love the devil. And I'm like, okay, but what does that really mean? Like, is that really, like, causing people to worship the devil? I don't know. I strongly disagree with that. I think, again, it kind of goes back to the whole, like, oh, if you listen to rock and roll, you're just going to be immediately, like, demon possessed and all that, which is what some people believe. And I don't believe that for a second. I don't know. Just my random thoughts on that.
And we must wonder, was it one similar to Tartini's? Dreams aside, we must now fast forward 2 centuries to the genre of music more notorious for Faustian bargains than any other, the blues.
Ooh, blues.
Robert Johnson, who would be a significant influence on Led Zeppelin long after his death, began as a struggling blues musician from the Mississippi Delta, born around the turn of the 20th century. He is perhaps most known not for his music, but for his alleged deal with the devil. Johnson is said to have approached the crossroads late on an October's evening, while the moon was full, and sold his soul to the devil, who came to him in the form of a large black man. The devil took Johnson's guitar and tuned it, completing the deal. The crossroads has long been associated with the paranormal. In both European and African folklore, the crossroads are a meeting point where the eternal truth touches the passing world. Stories of the crossroads were very popular among the southern African American community in Johnson's time. In Africa, the crossroad legend goes back as far as the Anansi people of West Africa. In Anansi tradition, the crossroads symbolized the making of decisions, spiritual communion, and the crossing of boundaries, both physical and metaphysical. Stories of the crossroads often do present a symbolic boundary. For example, in one version of Robert Johnson's Pact, the devil says to him, "If you take one more step in the direction you're heading, you are going to have the blues like never known to this world." Whether Johnson did
So the devil's punny. I see. I don't know. Like, again, that's a situation where it's like, oh, you're a struggling musician, and if you don't have a belief in God or whatever, I could see just like trying whatever you could. And I see that, like, I could see that, like, you're a struggling actor in Los Angeles. You're like just barely making rent meet or ends meet, and you're just trying to pay the bills and whatever. And so you're like, okay, well, sure, I'll try this. Why not? Like, I could see that. So, I don't know, it's just interesting. Because I think for a while I used to think it was kind of like a conspiracy theory, but like, then I'm like, well, I am a Christian, and I do believe in spiritual warfare, so why wouldn't people who don't believe in God, like, do everything they can to become successful, right? Like, if it doesn't, why not try it? I don't know. I mean, for some people it works. Again, like the thing about the devil, he's a great liar, and he does have some power. He's not anywhere close to being on God's level. God will crush him in an instant, but he has enough power to deceive people. If you're not careful, you can be tempted by that.
sell his soul or not, we will never know. What we do know, however, is that prior to Johnson's supposed deal, he was considered by contemporaries to be an awful musician.
Wow.
He was said to have had no rhythm. He didn't have the blues.
Oh, no.
Johnson was murdered at the age of 27 by the jealous husband of one of his many girlfriends.
Okay.
A poisoned bottle of whiskey saw him crouched over, dead and bleeding from the mouth. What is perhaps most curious about Johnson's deal is not the Faustian bargain itself, as that's been seen hundreds of times, but rather the embodiment of the devil as a black man at the crossroads. In African esoteric religion, specifically Haitian voodoo, the guardian of the crossroads is Papa Legba. Legba serves as a gateway between the physical and spiritual worlds, providing a way for both to communicate with one another. Papa Legba is thought of as a trickster, but not a particularly evil or malevolent one, differing considerably from the Faustian concept of the crossroads devil. If we interpret the story of Robert Johnson through the lens of African religious folklore, then the dark figure Johnson meets is not a vile and despicable spirit, but rather a friend. In fact, folklorists have theorized that Johnson was a practitioner of voodoo, not Christianity. And this tells a very different scenario where Johnson did not visit the crossroads to sell his soul, but instead to ask his God for divine guidance and wisdom. The same outcome, however, might not translate to those who may have recreated his legendary actions with the wrong idea and intention. It may not be Papa Legba that they summon. Whatever Johnson did on that fateful night,
It is angels have the ability, to kind of like shape. I don't know what the right word. They can transform into things, right? Like Scripture says, sometimes you entertain angels not knowing, and so I've always kind of interpreted like, oh, that person you meet outside the road and you just did something nice for, that could have been an angel. I don't know, or somebody comes and helps you, and that could have been an angel. Like, so they do have the ability to like shape shift and like transform, and so Satan used to be, an angel, so he would have that ability to like, become the image of a god you worship. Or and you hear stories of people even today saying they have, visions of an angel talking to them, an angel of light. And I think it even says, I can't remember in scripture where it says Satan has that power to do that, where he can appear as an angel. I need to double check that, but I believe somewhere in the New Testament, I believe. But yeah, so which again is why you have to understand what you believe in, because an angel of light is talking to you, but then he starts talking completely contrary to scripture. It's not an angel of God. It's not someone sent from God. So it's interesting because it's so easy, again, to be deceived, because the devil is a liar. So he'll dress up as whoever you want him to be. He'll say whatever you want him to say. He just wants you to not go to God. He just doesn't want you to put your faith in God. Just put your faith in yourself, put your faith in him, put your faith in whatever. Just don't put it on God, and he'll dress up however he wants to do that.
He lived and died a legend and inspired countless musicians after him, the members of Led Zeppelin included. We know for a fact that at least 2 of the band's songs were directly influenced by and arguably taken from Robert Johnson, specifically the Lemon Song and Trampled Underfoot. And in 1969, they covered his song Traveling Riverside Blues. Rock and roll music, as we know it today, emerged from the blues. Bands like the Rolling Stones were inspired by musicians such as Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, and Robert Johnson. The Rolling Stones began playing blues music fused with rock and roll in England. The Stones would later cite Muddy Waters as their main source of inspiration. Waters' song, Rolling Stone, was where they got their name. Another artist who drew great inspiration from the blues was Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix claimed that Muddy Waters was the first guitarist he had ever heard, and that Waters' performance blew him away. His rock and roll attitude and onstage persona he borrowed from Chuck Berry. Hendrix's blues roots gave way to a successful, albeit tragically short, career as a psychedelic rocker, until his sudden death at 27. Artists like the Beatles, Cream, the Yardbirds, and the New Yardbirds, which would later become Led Zeppelin, were also inspired by the blues. In 1998, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant even journeyed to the Mississippi Delta to pay tribute at the tombstones of dead bluesmen. The supernatural has been with the blues for as long as the blues have been the blues.
Didn't know that. See? History lesson. I don't know. I think I knew blues influenced a lot. I didn't know it influenced it that much. That's interesting. Not that big of a blues guy. Not, like, this is the conversation I had with my fiance. She's like 70s rock and roll, and I'm kind of like an 80s, like, that glam rock pop stuff. I don't know. I'm not into it as much as I am anymore, as I used to be. I feel like, too, with, like, it's interesting, another random rant about, like, depending on where I am in life, like, position, like, spiritually, or what's going on in my life, that tends to be, like, affect the type of genre of music I listen to. Because, like, there's music I listened to in high school that I go back to and I listen to, and I'm like, it doesn't impact me like it did back then. And back then, it was good for me, but now it's like, okay, it's not really my style anymore. So, I don't know, just music's, again, it's fascinating because there's so many things that influence it, and it is kind of like you can have like a spiritual experience with it. I know, especially with Christians and like worship music and that kind of thing, like it kind of can invoke a reaction and emotion like a lot of times we talk about in Christian or in church camp about you feel the emotion of it, but do you really believe it, kind of thing? Because some people listen to the music like, oh yes, I want to give my life to God and all this stuff, but then 2 seconds later they completely forget about it, and because as soon as the song stops, it's like, okay, whatever. And so I've seen that before. And then there's others who obviously are genuine, they really want to give their life to God, and they go on, they follow the Lord, which again I think is why Jesus says watch the fruit, because some people say they're believers, but then they never act like it. So I don't know, it's just interesting. Music's really interesting how it can like invoke certain emotions and those types of things.
References to the devil are made in countless blues albums and singles. It is no surprise then that impressionable young British men, inspired by the great bluesmen of their generation, would also become interested in the supernatural. The birthplace of the blues is commonly thought to be Mississippi. To this day, you'll find large African American communities there who still hold their African roots close to their chests. It is from within these communities that we find the source of the supernatural elements of the blues. Many of the people there, while now largely Christian, were originally practitioners of voodoo, and much of their spirituality spilt over into the music that they wrote and produced. The supernatural influences on blues music fed into early rock and roll. As rock was becoming popular in England, there was a countercultural revolution taking place. The youth were growing out their hair, turning away from authority, and embracing freedom. Jimmy Page was one of these long-haired British teenagers, shunning societal norms.
It's interesting too how music can like lead that kind of thing, like a change from societal norms. Like you kind of music can like help lead that charge a little bit. So again, I don't know, music's just very powerful, and so I understand why some people will say like, oh, rock and roll is just naturally evil. Like, I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but again, I think intent is so critically important. I think you can't have Christian metal, you can't have Christian rock and roll, you can't have Christian hip hop, Christian rap, whatever. Like you can have those things. I don't think genre music is just naturally evil. I think intent is. But it's interesting. And it's also interesting when the topic of selling your soul to the devil, because I grew up in church my whole life. And there's some people who think that's just like a ludicrous idea that no one does that. I think I have friends who think that way too. Like I kind of talk about, there was a video by Barely Sociable that was about, the death clause. I don't know if I mentioned it, this video. I feel like, I don't know. Anyway, and it's just the idea that when you die, a musician being worth more dead than he is alive. And so it kind of builds off a conspiracy, and he talks about in that video, selling your soul to the devil and that kind of thing. And so I have friends who are very strong Christian believers, and I respect them very much. But they just completely reject the idea that that's a thing. Like people who sell their soul to the devil, like that's just lunacy. And there's kind of people like me who are on the other end, and we kind of believe that people do that. I don't know. It's just interesting, the perspectives and Christian church on this conversation. It's a vast array of opinions.
The occult, for many young people at that time, including Page, was the polar opposite to the traditional Christianity that pervaded all sectors of British society. While the blues profoundly influenced Page and his generation's interest in the occult, there, of course, were other sources of inspiration. Aleister Crowley is a controversial figure, to say the least. He's also incredibly misunderstood. Many claim Crowley was a Satanist, though that suggests little understanding of the occult. Crowley was a magician, but not a devil worshipper, at least in the conventional sense. However, Crowley's magic was far from the play magic of David Blaine. His interests were not in illusions, but in unlocking dimensions, conversing with angels, and summoning demons. Crowley was a former member of the Golden Dawn Society, a group founded by Samuel Little McGregor Mathers toward the turn of the 20th century. The society was a secret one, akin to the Freemasons. The group claimed to have access to secret magical Egyptian knowledge. The Golden Dawn's intentions were not evil. In fact, the society wanted humanity to rise to higher levels of consciousness and awareness.
I do wonder if ancient cultures had a better grasp of like this, not necessarily like in truth or whatever, but like in terms of like spiritual realm, like they had better access to that than we do today. Because I mean, today we kind of have like the atheistic mentality, and we kind of like keep the spiritual realm shut. But then like you go to ancient Egypt and you see all these different worlds, and so spirituality, it was right in front of you at all times. And obviously, I mean, you have Christians or you have the Jews and you have ancient Egypt and all these people and their different beliefs, but spirituality was always there. This religious belief was always there. And so that kind of like realm into like demons and angels like was easier for people to grasp. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just interesting because we kind of like live in a spiritually dull generation right now, like the most spiritually dull generation of all time, I feel like, where people just don't really believe in anything. It's just like, well, you know, the world which just kind of popped up and we leave it there. But then you go to ancient Egypt and they believe this, and you go to this other country and they believe this, and so you have all these like different gods and beliefs and systems, and it's just interesting. You know, I do wonder what everyone saw, because you do hear stories of like supernatural stories of them seeing this god or that god, and you wonder, is it real, or did they see a demon, or what was going on there? I don't know. It's interesting that maybe they had like demons were more visible back then, and angels were more visible back then than they are today because of human faith. I don't know. That's just me talking out loud for some reason.
They wanted the world to wake up. One member of the Golden Dawn was famed Irish poet William Butler Yeats. Another was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a medical doctor and author of Sherlock Holmes. Crowley was supposedly responsible for tearing the group apart through bitter infighting. Many of the Golden Dawn's leadership considered Crowley's form of magic to be self-centered and selfish, a sentiment he would later embrace with his "do what thou wilt" credo. After the Golden Dawn split, Crowley founded his own secret society, Ordo Templi Orientis, also known as OTO. The organization's religious headquarters was in Cefalu, Sicily. Crowley's life was spent in orgies and the consumption of copious amounts of drugs.
Okay.
Regardless, he never abandoned his commitment to esoteric magic and continued to mystify and alert.
I do wonder too with drugs if they are like a gateway to seeing. I don't think this. I do believe this. That like, I think it's like LSD. I don't know my drugs that well. I think it's LSD where like you see certain demons or certain gods or whatever. I think that drugs can be an easy pathway to that realm, to that demonic realm. I very much believe that. I think you can absolutely, some people say, oh, you're crazy and you're, having these illusions, but I think it absolutely opens you up to the possibility of talking to those things. So I think that's, again, interesting conversation in modern day church about that. Because obviously, I mean, you don't really talk about that stuff for right or wrong reasons. I don't know if it's necessarily, I don't think it's probably appropriate for Sunday morning conversation. I do think it's interesting for like adult conversations, but even adult conversations in church tend to be pretty vanilla a lot, and I think they try to play it safe. But I don't know, it's interesting. The world, I think a lot of us try to get a picture of the world that makes us feel comfortable, and then we try to do everything we can to justify it, and then when something like comes in that challenges us or challenges our belief, we try to like immediately throw it out. But I don't think it's wise. I don't think that's godly either. I think we're always supposed to be adapting to new information and just what's actually in front of us. And I think this is an interesting conversation. Selling your soul to the devil. Does that something happen? Like I said, like I have friends who are Christians who very much say it doesn't happen. And so how does that affect your viewpoint on a lot of different things? How does that affect your opinions on a lot of different things? How does that affect your beliefs on a lot of different things if you don't believe that happens? It's an interesting butterfly effect for me. Like if you don't believe that, how does that affect everything else you believe in? I don't know. It's just interesting. Not that again, people are allowed to have their opinion. I'm not trying to like throw my friends under the bus. I very much respect them. We get along very well. I'm just saying it's interesting because, like, for me, I believe people do sell their soul to the devil. So that affects my beliefs and the things I see on the news sometimes and things I see in entertainment sometimes. Like, that affects how I see it, how I view it. Whereas they look at it from a completely different lens. So it's just interesting how that like affects your view.
Or his followers long after his death. In fact, he is said to have been the inspiration for L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology. Crowley was a well-cultured, educated, and clever man.
It's a nice outfit.
He was
there.
also selfish, domineering, and cruel. It was his cruelty that, in the end, pushed people away from him. By the time of his death, Crowley had only a few followers. He died in a boarding house in Hastings, England. His last words, according to a friend, were, "Sometimes I hate myself." It was not Crowley's life that was particularly remarkable to the teenagers of the 1960s, with whom he became an icon, but rather his "do what thou wilt" credo. Musicians, beatniks, and rebels began to live according to this phrase. Ultimately, what Aleister Crowley and his teaching stood for was a rejection of society, self-gratification, and the pursuing of one's desires, however depraved and however abstract. It was this attitude that spurred the 60s countercultural revolution. Young people became emboldened, courageous, and were finally able to enjoy themselves through sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So the occult was fashionable, most certainly. But with all types of fashion, we find people who take them much more seriously than others. One such person was Jimmy Page, who came, in a way, to almost worship Crowley, going as far as to join his organization, OTO, where he has remained a member for nearly 50 years. Crowley's particular brand of magic was inspired by a spirit named Aiwass, who he channeled through his wife while in Cairo. Thus, the magic he promoted was supposedly of the ancient Egyptians, which we can see from his religious texts and writings, as they are abound with references to a mystic, secret form of Egyptian magic.
It's interesting that he was going back to Egypt too. Noticing this. Because again, going back to Exodus, you have Moses and the Egyptians and their ability to do magic. And so it's just interesting how all these people, or at least the ones he's mentioned here, keep going back to like these ancient Egyptian things and that dark side. And I don't know. It's interesting how that ties into Exodus a little bit. And that, the Egyptians may have had that demonic spiritual realm opened up a little bit. I don't know, just interesting.
This too was something embraced by Jimmy Page. In the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, one of Page's stage outfits is displayed. On it, we see the Eye of Horus enveloped in a pyramid. What is for one person a passing breeze is for another a tornado that consumes every part of them. For Jimmy Page, it appears that he was of the latter persuasion. Page's life has been shrouded in mystery. He is an elusive and intriguing figure, and undoubtedly one of the greatest rock stars to ever walk on this earth. A rock star unlike any other.
I will say too, I think Scripture says we are in spiritual warfare. I think for Christians who kind of remain, I don't want to say blind to it, but I guess a little more skeptical when things are happening. You can, I don't know, for me personally, when I was like in high school, I guess this is where I'm going with this. I wasn't like, I had a rough relationship with God, like my junior, like sophomore, or like early high school, freshman, sophomore, junior years. And so, like I said, how my music interest has changed over the years. I think part of that is because I am a little more aware of spiritual warfare. And so sometimes there are certain things that, like, I'm listening to a song or I'm watching a TV show that I watched back then, and something like jumps out at me, and it kind of like, I don't go back to that thing anymore. I don't watch that show or I don't listen to that song anymore because I can't stop on seeing that. And so when you have these like spiritual lenses on and you start to see like, here's God working and here's the greatness of God, and you're like, oh wow, you praise God. But there's also that we live on earth, and so there's that other darkness where you're like, oh, the devil's moving here or this is happening there, and like you can see like dark roads people are starting to go down or that kind of thing. It's jarring a little bit. And I absolutely get, again, I can understand the opinion of people who, because some have come out of that, out of, demonic stuff, or they used to be Satanists and they came to Christ, and so they're like, they, trash rock and roll and all that. And I respect, again, fully their opinion and their testimony. I think they're not trying to mislead anybody. But I think, again, too, you can't have a Christian side of that too, because God can always transform things. So it can be evil. Like rock and roll can maybe start out evil, maybe it does start out satanic, but there can be another side of that, like where it flips, where it can be used for good too. So I don't think it has to be inherently evil. But again, I understand why once you kind of see that, like you see like Jimmy Page and you think all these things like, oh, how many more Jimmy Pages were there out there? Like I can understand like how you could have that opinion, 100%. I still don't subscribe to that, but I can understand it a little more.
Jimmy Page was born to James and Patricia Page in West London on the 9th of January, 1944. His father was a personnel manager at a plastic coating plant. His mother was a doctor's secretary. In 1952, Page's family moved to Epsom, Surrey, which is where Page first developed a love for music. His first guitar was a Spanish one, and he found it mysteriously in a cupboard in his home, as if by magic. He would later say, "I don't know whether the guitar was left behind by the people in the house before us, or whether it was a friend of the family's. Nobody seemed to know why it was there." Jimmy Page, to his credit, was largely self-taught. He attended very few guitar classes and mastered the instrument on his own. In 1957, he appeared on BBC One with a guitar he had bought with his savings. His first electric guitar he bought secondhand. From an early age, Page was a fan of the blues, citing Elmore James, B.B. King, Otis Rush, Freddie King, and Muddy Waters as his inspirations. Page's interest in the occult also began young. As a schoolboy of 15, he read Aleister Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice. After coming across a book, he would later be quoted as saying, "Yes, that's it. My thing. I've found it." By the mid-1960s, Page had become an accomplished session guitarist and surrounded himself with groupies, hippies, and pot-smoking dropouts. The sex, drugs, and rock and roll, however, were not enough for the young Jimmy Page. After rising to fame in the Yardbirds,
I think too, with situations like these, where like you become a famous musician and then like you get all these girls, you get all this money, you can get as high as you want all the time, and then eventually after a while it's like, oh, okay, you need something else. Sorry, sorry. You need something else to entertain you. And so I guess you get to that crossroads where you were given a choice of, are you going to follow God or are you going to follow the devil? I do believe like people in power or even famous people are kind of like brought to this crossroads where they're either going to use their fame and success for themselves or they're going to use their fame and success for God. And I think you see that with Jesus too in the wilderness, where he has this great spiritual high. God says, "This is my beloved son, who I'm real proud of." And then immediately after that, he's tempted to go somewhere else. He's tempted to follow the devil, and he doesn't give in. He stays strong. But I think that is another important image of, the devil knows who's an influencer, someone who can influence people of whether it's power, someone famous, someone popular, or whatever. And so the devil tries to get to those people because, again, he wants to keep eyes off God. So if you're in that position of influence, you're in a really big spiritual warfare, I feel like. And so, I don't know, it's just interesting because, again, when I never really thought about spiritual warfare, but I've been really thinking about it a lot the last year, especially and with 2020 and on, like really thinking about spiritual warfare. And so once I started studying a little bit, I don't know, it's just like you start seeing all these different things and all these different scenarios kind of play out in real life. And then you kind of go back to the Bible and you see it there. And so I don't know, it's just interesting. But yeah, it has. We're only 20 minutes in. We're halfway there. Okay, that's fine. We've been going on 50 minutes, and I probably need to get going. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Love to hear what your thoughts are on this. And if there's any other videos you would like me to react to, really loving the work Mr. Myth. I've never seen a Mr. Mythos video before. I'm only 20 minutes into this, but thoroughly enjoying it. Loving the information here. So massive credit to him. Did an amazing job. I know he has like other videos on like demonology and all that. So if y'all are interested, maybe I'll react to that. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to everyone who likes and subscribes and comments. It means the world to me. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a blessed day. See ya.